Now, Vice News has been covering the McMahon stuff, and they had a new story this week that made me equal parts sad and angry. And it involves former Diva Search winner Ashley Massaro, who spent 3 years working for WWE and went through one of the most horrific experiences that a person could go through. She claimed that she was drugged and raped on a WWE trip to the Middle East, not by a wrestler, but by somebody else on the military base where they took her one day when she got sick. A few years ago, after she took her own life, the lawyer who represented her in the concussion lawsuit against WWE released an affidavit that she made about her treatment during her time in WWE. And in that affidavit, she details what happened to her and her claim that she was asked by WWE management not to report the assault out of fear that it would jeopardize their relationship with the military. And in response, WWE claimed that no time was Vince McMahon or any member of WWE management ever told by Ashley or anyone else that she had been drugged or assaulted. Now, the lawyer for John Laurinaitis, the same John Laurinaitis that is named as a co-defendant in the Janelle Grant lawsuit, and the same John Laurinaitis that is now throwing his former boss under the bus, admits that, well, that wasn't exactly true. So I'm going to read you from this story. It's a story by Tim Marchman. And just be aware, again, there's some disturbing stuff in here. So if that's the sort of thing you can't handle or you don't want to hear about, you've been warned. I'm going to read from this story, though. I'm going to read also partially from the affidavit. I'm going to chime in with my thoughts because there's just so much to unwrap here. But it says, Vince McMahon stands accused of covering up the alleged rape of a WWE wrestler who later died by an apparent suicide. Yeah, and when she died, she was 10 days shy of her 40th birthday. And TMZ reported at the time that she hung herself. But who later died by an apparent suicide at a military base in Kuwait and of sexually harassing her, according to legal documents and people who knew her. John Laurinaitis, a former WWE executive and McMahon's co-defendant in an explosive civil sex trafficking lawsuit, is also implicated. His lawyer objected to the use of the term cover-up, but confirmed that Laurinaitis knew about the allegations and said most upper-level management was, contradicting WWE's claim that executives were never made aware of them. In a sworn affidavit her lawyer released in 2019, after her death, former wrestler Ashley Massaro said that she was injected with a paralyzing drug and raped by somebody representing himself as an army doctor while on tour with WWE in Kuwait in 2006. Massaro also said that top executives of the company, including McMahon and Laurinaitis, told her not to talk about the incident and agreed to not talk about it themselves, in part to preserve the company's relationship with the military. He told me not to let one bad experience ruin the good work they were doing, Massaro said of McMahon in the affidavit. Vice News can report for the first time that the Naval Criminal Intelligence Service opened an investigation into Massaro's allegations in June of 2019. That investigation was closed in January of 2020, according to an NCIS spokesperson. Further information, they said, could not be immediately released, as it would need to be obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. So there was, finally, an investigation done, but we don't know what, if anything, they discovered. I'm sure some of the journalists involved have already filed FOIA requests, so maybe we'll eventually find out. But so much time has gone by since that tour. I mean, I'm not going to hold my breath on them finding anything. In the years since the affidavit was released, new information had come to light to corroborate some of Massaro's claims and cast doubt on WWE's subsequent denial even before the statement from Laurinaitis' lawyer. Paul London, a former WWE wrestler who dated Massaro when they were both with the company, has also said since that Massaro was herself a victim of McMahon's sexual misconduct. The allegations appear in a new light following the filing of a civil lawsuit accusing McMahon and Laurinaitis of raping a WWE employee, and McMahon of covering it up by strong-arming her into signing a non-disclosure agreement. I'm not surprised by any of it, London said of the recent claims against McMahon. He compared WWE to NXIVM, the cult led by now convicted sex trafficker Keith Raniere. Massaro's road to WWE stardom was far from traditional, and she said in her affidavit, rife with mistreatment from the start. In 2005, she was cast in the Diva Search, a reality competition of sorts that aired as part of the company's flagship Raw program. As the winner, Massaro got a WWE contract, and despite being, she would later say, completely untrained, immediately joined Raw as a wrestler. Over the next 3 years, she performed as a wrestler and a valet, and represented the WWE brand as a Survivor contestant and Playboy model before being released in 2008. In 2016, Massaro joined a lawsuit brought by a number of former wrestlers against McMahon and WWE, seeking damages related to the effects of traumatic brain injuries they suffered while wrestling. According to a filing in the suit, Massaro said that she had been sexually assaulted in Kuwait, and that Ferdinand Rios, a WWE doctor, had reported the incident to WWE executives, who soon thereafter met with Massaro to apologize for their negligence, but persuaded her that it would be best not to report it to the appropriate authorities. In a filing the next month, WWE called the claim a stale and baseless allegation and denied Massaro had ever reported a sexual assault to anyone affiliated with WWE, saying that she had been heard telling others that the doctor, quote, had done an inappropriate pelvic exam. As headlines at the time about Dr. Larry Nassar molesting hundreds of girls and women under the guise of medical treatment would have made clear, this can itself be a form of sexual assault. A judge dismissed the case in 2018, after which plaintiff's lawyer Konstantin Kiros, whom the judge had sanctioned and ordered to pay WWE's fees, filed the first in an ongoing series of appeals. Kiros noted that Massaro's affidavit was made under oath to a federal judge. So let's stop there. Konstantin Kiros was the lawyer who led that giant concussion lawsuit against WWE. Jerry McDevitt, on behalf of WWE, accused him of plagiarizing all sorts of things from the concussion suit that was filed against the NFL and using it in his own lawsuit. I think what happened there was, this lawyer saw that the NFL settled, and they settled for over $1 billion, and figured that WWE would also settle, but they didn't. The NHL settled the concussion lawsuit too. This was years later, but the NHL lawsuit was, I think, like $20 million or something. It was settled for a lot less than the NFL one. But he probably thought the WWE would fold, and they didn't. And it's very tough to prove these wrestlers' claims. In a lot of cases, there were wrestlers on that list. I remember talking about this at the time. There were wrestlers on that list who had not worked for WWE for decades. So the statute of limitations had expired, but you also had in other cases wrestlers on there who maybe worked for WWE for a brief period of time. Like people like in the 80s who would have passed through there and worked for a few months over the course of a 15 or 20 year career. Maybe they spent 6 months working for Vince McMahon and then they worked other places. How can you prove that if they have brain damage, they got it from working in a WWE ring? So he didn't really have much of a shot. And not only did the suit go nowhere, the lawyer got sanctioned. And he had to pay WWE back over $300,000 in legal fees, which I think he has still yet to pay. I don't think he's actually paid it yet. He's still trying to appeal that case, though, to the Supreme Court. It ain't going to go nowhere. But he's still trying to get it to the Supreme Court. But in taking her on as a client, Ashley submitted this affidavit, and it touched on a lot of things unrelated to the concussion stuff, and it was never released publicly until she died in 2019. After that, he published the affidavit that she had signed, I think it was in 2017, that describes in her words what happened to her on that overseas trip in 2006. Now, in the but in the affidavit, it's listed as 2007. It was actually 2006. And it was a trip to the Middle East with Jimmy Hart, who blogged about the trip for WWE.com at the time. Those blogs are still up if you search for them. It was Jimmy Hart, Ron Simmons, Ashley, and Maria Kanellis. And it was a tour of various U.S. military facilities in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't want to read, I'm not reading all 15 pages of this affidavit verbatim, but She claimed that particular day she was suffering from menstrual cramps. And they said, no, you're dehydrated, and they got her to a military base where they gave her an IV. And Jimmy Hart came to check on her to make sure she was okay. Eventually, Jimmy left. He went to go get lunch with the others. So they left her by herself. And then a couple of hours later, as she's laying there, she says, a man representing himself as an army doctor. As it turned out, I think this might have been a Navy base, but she thought it was an army doctor. And a woman in fatigues appeared, administered another IV, and they took her to another room. Massaro, according to a source with knowledge, was taken to Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, where the clinic would have been staffed by Navy rather than Army personnel. This would explain why NCIS handled the case, even though Massaro said the rapist purported to be an Army doctor. She said the woman guarded the door while the man proceeded to inject me with a drug that caused me to be unable to move my body or scream. The man then proceeded to violently rape and sodomize me. I was completely helpless to defend myself against this attack, as the drug he injected rendered me temporarily paralyzed. Despite being unable to control my movements, I remained fully conscious for every second of the attack. Eventually, the statement says, a WWE staffer began banging on the door. The man and woman covered her with a quilt and left the room, and the staffer carried her away and brought her back to her hotel room. The sequence of events given in the statement, including Massaro falling ill, going for medical attention, and then being brought back to the hotel, is broadly consistent with the one described in a 2006 blog post published on WWE's website by Jimmy Hart. Ashley continues, obviously, given my mental and physical condition and that I was in Kuwait and the group had to leave for the next destination, I was not in a position to stick around by myself and have a rape kit administered. While en route to the next destination, I told Jimmy, Ron, and Maria that I did not want to tell anyone else what happened. They agreed to respect my wishes. After I returned to the U.S., Dr. Rios set a meeting with me and questioned me about the incident. I have no idea how he knew anything had happened. I suspect that either something showed up in my drug test results, one of the other individuals on the tour reported it to him, or he could just sense from my demeanor that something was wrong. Regardless, he told me that I needed to tell him what happened. I finally agreed on the condition that he not disclose the information to anyone else, and I told him what had occurred. Dr. Rios then informed Vince, who informed Kevin Dunn, John Laurinaitis, and several other company executives or lawyers that I had never even met, but were all present at a meeting that I was called into shortly after. Vince led the meeting with these men and asked me to recount what happened in Kuwait. Then he said that it was not in the best interest of WWE for me to make the information about my attack public. I was still completely traumatized at that point, and I just agreed. It was clear that there had already been a conversation and that they had reached a decision on their own prior to consulting with me, as this was not a debate, but rather Vince instructing me to keep this confidential. Vince did at least apologize for what I went through, but then stressed that if I disclosed this incident, it would ruin the relationship between WWE and the U.S. military. He told me not to let one bad experience ruin the good work they were doing. His lack of sensitivity in referring to my ordeal as one bad experience left me speechless. Vince went on to say that I would not be required to travel to the Middle East ever again, and that WWE would institute a new policy where anytime a female performer went to the Middle East, she would have a female escort with her 24/7 to ensure this did not happen again. This did not make me feel better about the situation. It had already happened to me, and the damage was already done. But again, I felt so defeated at that point that it seemed pointless to protest. I also admittedly was uncomfortable with the thought of all the wrestlers finding out, so I asked Vince and those in the room to keep the incident quiet, and they agreed. So she wanted to keep the whole thing quiet as far as the roster was concerned. I don't know if she would have wanted them to report it to the appropriate military personnel, but according to her, they beat her to the punch by asking her to keep it quiet anyway. Not out of any concern for her well-being, but for the well-being of the company, which is not how this sort of thing should ever be handled. After she died, and her lawyer published this affidavit, this was in 2019, WWE issued the following statement. WWE is saddened by the death of Ashley Massaro, and we reiterate our condolences to her family. However, We regret that her attorney, Konstantin Kiros, who filed multiple cases against WWE, lost all of them, and was sanctioned multiple times by the court for repeated misconduct and false allegations, is using Ashley's death to further his malicious campaign against WWE by releasing an affidavit that she submitted to the court and later apologized to WWE for being involved with. So we wish to make certain things crystal clear. At no time was Vince McMahon or the management of WWE ever informed by Ashley Massaro or anyone else that she had been sexually assaulted, drugged, raped, or sodomized by a military doctor with a nurse standing guard while on a goodwill tour in 2007 to U.S. military bases in Kuwait. In fact, if she ever articulated such a claim to WWE, we would have reported it immediately to the base commander. At no time was there ever a meeting with Vince McMahon, Kevin Dunn, John Laurinaitis, or other company executives in which she told them of such a claim and was instructed to keep it quiet. I think it's important to note that the apology she supposedly emailed to the company that they publicly put out, I think it was about a month after the concussion suit was dismissed, apologized for being roped into the lawsuit by her attorney. It did not say anything about the assault in Kuwait, because there were some people online conflating the two, like she was apologizing for lying about what happened to her. That is not at all what she said in that email. But picking back up with the Vice story, according to what Laurinaitis says, which is corroborated by an interview given last fall by Dr. Rios, that statement that WWE put out was not true. A TKO spokesperson declined to comment on whether WWE stands by its denial. And it goes on to talk about Paul London going on Rene Dupree's podcast last year to talk about Ashley, who he dated at one time. When the podcast was recorded, it was right after Vince stepped down after the first Wall Street Journal story. There have been a lot of stories since. But after that first one, this is when this was recorded. And London said, "I do remember specifically many times when she would be crying to me because Vince was propositioning her to fly on the jet with them. Kevin Dunn would be telling her that she has to fly on the jet with them, or every now and then they would always put the divas up at the TV hotel or whatever. Vince would be knocking on her door and trying to get her to answer. I'm shocked this Vince stuff is just now coming out. As you say, what's known in the wrestling business is believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. So there's always that weighing on one thing, but of course I'm going to believe my girlfriend at the time, especially when I can see her physically shaken and disturbed. She was a good actress, but she wasn't that good of an actress." The article says last September, Audible released a podcast called Ashley vs. WWE, in which people who knew Masaro offered new corroboration of claims made in the affidavit. Some of this was less specific, such as her cousin saying that she had intimated that somebody had attempted to rape her, her best friend saying that Masaro had told her that a doctor did something to her, and that it was swept under the rug, and an unnamed source saying Masaro had told them that she had been sexually assaulted and urged by WWE to keep it quiet. More specific new information reported by the podcast, though, contradicts WWE's past denials. Reporter Isabel Thompson talked to London, who described Masaro feeling trapped, frightened, and preyed upon when McMahon and Dunn would pressure her to fly on the company jet, or when McMahon would come knocking on her hotel door at night. He said that she had told him she was raped after returning from Kuwait and that she had met with WWE executives who told her not to say anything about it. Thompson also reached Ferdinand Rios, the WWE doctor, whom Masaro told about the rape and whom said she reported it to McMahon, according to the affidavit. Rios, who did not return a message left with his office, confirmed to Thompson that while the details are a bit unclear in his memory due to the passage of time, he does remember that Masaro told him about the rape after returning to the U.S. from Kuwait. He said, "I spoke with her and she told me a little bit about it." He further said that it was fairly widely known within WWE at the time. He said those that went would tell those that did not go that this happened. While he said he does believe her story, his recollection differs from what is recounted in the affidavit in one key particular. While she stated that he had told McMahon about the incident, he remembers that it was common knowledge and a subject of gossip, and that he approached Laurinaitis about it only to find out that he was already aware. He already knew, and no one wanted to give me any further details about it, he said. I had nothing to do with it, they said, so it was just sort of a shock, when you're restricted from saying anything else. In an email, Laurinaitis' lawyer, the divorce lawyer, that's what he is. When you look him up, he's a divorce lawyer. He's probably going to need a divorce lawyer after all this. He told Vice, at some point, Johnny heard about the allegations in general, i.e. that Ms. Massaro claims she had been assaulted in Kuwait. As to when McMahon found out about the allegations, Johnny has no idea as to when or whether. Vice published a second story 2 days later with a previously unreleased statement from Ashley given to her lawyers as they worked up that affidavit. It was not included in the affidavit because her lawyers felt that it just wasn't relevant to the main claims of the lawsuit, which had to do with concussions. It didn't really do anything to advance their case, so they just left it out. But now it has been released. And in it, she accuses Vince McMahon of sexually preying on female wrestlers and alleging that she was punished for rejecting his advances by being given bad scripts to read on TV that were intended to destroy her reputation. Here's the full text of what she said. During my time with the WWE, I had observed Vince McMahon making out with other divas in the locker room, but he never paid attention to me, and I assumed I was not his type. This changed after my Playboy cover was released. I was fortunate enough to be allowed to fly on the company jet and stay at the same hotels as the executives for a period of time so that I could get home faster to spend more time with my daughter. On one of these occasions, Vince was attempting to get me alone with him in his hotel room late at night, and I felt extraordinarily uncomfortable. He began calling the hotel room phone and my cell phone nonstop. I called Kevin Dunn to explain the situation, and he said that I should tell Vince that I was not feeling well and would see him on TV the next day, so I did. Immediately after that night, Vince started writing my promos for me. Vince does not write promos for female wrestlers. That is the job of the creative department, and he certainly would not have, under any normal circumstances, written a promo for me. But he did, and the promos were written with the clear intention of ruining my career. I brought the first script Vince wrote for me to the WWE employee in charge of creative at the time, Michael Hayes, and he said, "You're not saying this. Who the blank, expletive, wrote this?" And I told him that Vince did. He said, "Well, kid, these are the breaks," meaning that Vince wanted to end my career and destroy my reputation on my way out. He is known for this type of behavior and also did this too, and then they redacted the person's name, upon her departure from WWE. In addition, after that night, each time I walked by him, he would make vulgar sexual comments that were clearly designed to make me uncomfortable. I'm not surprised that she would call Kevin Dunn or be somewhat close to him because the Diva Search was always said to be his pet project, if not his idea. He, more than most, probably wanted to see her do well because it would only validate the whole Diva Search concept and show that it was a good idea. It was a good idea. Yeah, it was a good idea to take women with no previous wrestling training and throw them in the ring on live television. It's no wonder this woman got hooked on pain pills. You know, Ashley said that after her second week, she went to Stephanie McMahon and asked her if she could get proper training, and Stephanie told her no, because that would mean going to OVW, which was their developmental at the time. You go to OVW, that means that you're going to be off TV and you're going to lose your spot. And all the popularity that you built up with the fans is going to be gone. So then she started getting hurt. So she went back to Stephanie a second time to ask if she could go to, I think it was Mikey Whipwreck's school on Long Island, where she lived, so she could train there. She was actually training at Mikey's school for a comeback right before she died. But Stephanie said no again. So she started taking classes there anyway because she kept getting hurt. Because she was smart enough to know that she didn't know what the fuck she was doing. So she wanted to take classes. Stephanie somehow found out about this and told her to stop because it would be some kind of liability for the company if she got hurt. But she got absolutely wrecked in the short period of time that she wrestled. Again, it was only 3 years that she was there. But there was one time she got knocked unconscious. She said Trish Stratus told her to shake it off because Trish knew that if Ashley complained, she would get in trouble. And back then, you know, probably with the men too, if you got your bell rung or you're seeing stars, shake it off and get back in there. So who knows how many concussions she actually did suffer. She fractured her spine. She had to have a metal plate inserted after she broke her leg when she got dumped out of a battle royal on Raw. She broke her hand, which is when they made her the manager for London and Kendrick. And she says she was told to keep the cast on for a month. 2 weeks later, she said Vince McMahon ordered the cast to be sawed off right there in the back so that she could go out and wrestle. And even after she left the company, she still had more surgeries stemming from some of those injuries, right up until a few years before her death. It's disgusting the way that they threw these women on television with no experience. Not only did it make for terrible television, but I can only imagine how the more experienced women must have felt about having to work with them. You know, if you're someone at the time like a Mickie James or a Victoria or Jazz or Molly Holly or any of these people on the roster, you're out there, you've got 10, 15 years experience, however many years, and they're sticking you in the ring with these women who have 2 left feet, have never done this before, and don't know what the hell they're doing. If I'm them, I'm pissed because it's my ass on the line too. You put me in the ring with these people who are green as all hell and don't know what they're doing, it affects them just as much. Not only are they going to hurt themselves, but potentially they're going to hurt other people. You look at the performance center they have now and how things were back then. It's like the fucking Stone Age. Now, as far as Vince McMahon scripting embarrassing things for her to say on TV and trying to ruin her reputation, you mean the same Vince McMahon that Lita, on her Twitch stream only a few years ago, threatened to fire her when she said that she was uncomfortable doing the live sex celebration with Edge? Didn't want to do it? She said Edge and John Cena, they went to Vince to try to convince him not to do it, but he insisted on it. And they threatened to fire her if she didn't. The same Vince McMahon, who then buried Lita on her way out later that same year, had Crime Time go out, I think at the Survivor Series, and have a wholesale selling her panties to fans in the crowd. That Vince McMahon? He's been doing this shit for years. And he was able to hide behind the fact that it was all for entertainment. It's just TV. It's not real life. I'm sorry, his reputation does not give him the benefit of the doubt when it comes to allegations and stuff like this. He's always been a sick fuck. And now he's getting exposed for it. Good. I have no sympathy for the man. I do have sympathy for her and what she went through. It's very sad how things ended for Ashley. I don't know how much of what she went through in Kuwait had to do with why she took her own life, but that's the kind of shit that haunts you for the rest of your life. I mean, how could it not? What's just as haunting is something I found that's still up on WWE.com from 2006, talking about their upcoming trip to the Middle East. It has a quote from Ashley, or that they attribute to her. Anything can happen going over to the Middle East, but my company takes care of me, and I trust them. I have full faith that I will come back exactly the way I left, if not a little bit better in the heart. She definitely did not come back the same person she was when she left.